I thought I had more time, Himanshu. I missed you. It's been forever, Himanshu. How have you been?
I know, man. It's been wild. The last couple of months have been absolutely crazy, especially with a lot of exciting stuff coming up. Post reinvent is usually the time where customers and partners start soaking into all the new exciting announcements that we come across with. So it's just been overwhelming, helping both customers and partners deep dive into all those new features and exciting new releases. And we haven't stopped. So there's much more to come now. We have Reinforce, which is in high planning gear, and June 10th to 12th in Philadelphia this year will be the primary security persona-based conference from AWS, where there'll be more exciting news for both our partners and customers.
We'll have a gigantic partner booth area. You'll see all of our folks there. By the way, we should say hi to the second segment of Security Live.
Yes.
And this is Himanshu. We are your hosts from AWS. This show comes to you live every other Wednesday, 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. And we have a theme going on this show, right, Himanshu? We're not just talking about like AWS security services and AWS security challenges and everything. That's part of the theme, but we also have a very vibrant network of software and service partner companies that work with us in the AWS Partner Org. Your team and my team are engaged on a daily basis. We all have a mutual mission together. These partners of ours at AWS, we'd like to make security easier. We'd like to make it simpler. We'd like to make your lives easier. So we have a special guest from Orca, Neil. Hello, sir.
Hey.
Welcome to Security.
It's awesome to be here, and great opening tune. Do you guys have like a soundtrack I can download?
Producer Anne Marie would love to give you the soundtrack. Put it on your morning like shuffle. And
yeah.
Well, Neil, sir, do you want to say hello? Kind of what's your role and your background at Orca Security there?
So I'm Orca's field CTO, which means I spend a lot of time talking with AWS and our customers and the field. Do a lot of writing, do a lot of working with our engineering and research teams to take feedback back from the field, talk about what's important and what we're doing. So it's a really exciting role. And then Orca Security more generally, we are a cloud security platform. So for all of the things that you're building, deploying, running on AWS, on other clouds, we're going to give you visibility, give you really complete coverage of what's there, show you where the problems are, generate alerts based on those, help you address them. And the thing that makes us different, we were the first agentless solution, that sounds like a small thing to say, but it becomes a huge thing when we look at the impact. Our founders looked at agent-based security. That is, I've got to install something on every workload I'm interested in. And said that doesn't work really well in the cloud, where I've got everything is ephemeral, self-service. I actually talked to a CISO a few weeks ago who told me he had a security incident because somebody deployed a new EC2 instance and they didn't tell security about it. So they hadn't deployed their EDR agent on it. So they didn't have visibility into it. So our founders said, that's ridiculous. What if we use the cloud instead to solve those problems? And so we call it side scanning. What we do is we use the APIs in AWS to say, show me everything, how it's configured, what's out there. And then for all the workloads, we go, give me a snapshot of that. Give me a copy of it the way it is right now. And then we basically do forensics on that snapshot, pull it apart, what's installed in it, what's vulnerable, what's poorly configured. And so in that way, it's easy to install. I don't have to install an agent on everything. I don't have to plan for that. And 15 minutes or so of deployment, build a CloudFormation template, which we do automatically, drop it in AWS. We're deployed and starting to get value and seeing everything. Somebody deploys a new EC2 instance tomorrow, we've got visibility into it.
Awesome. Yeah, that shouldn't happen. And I'm glad you all are teamed up with us and like using what cloud can do for you just in terms of visibility, right? I mean, the old saying, if you can't protect what you can't see, absolutely applies. If your strategy depends on agents solely 100%. So there's kind of a pendulum swing, I think, in the security industry of agentless. What's the mixture? If you can get it all done agentless, awesome, because that's going to be your quickest, simplest way to get all the visibility you need. Then the visibility can become overwhelming, though, and I'm glad Orca, it sounds like you're also applying like analytics and intelligence onto
Very,
all this telemetry coming in, right?
yeah, very much so. And that's such a real problem of, and my background, I was an incident responder for over a decade. So I saw a lot of where this goes wrong, and really lived in that world. And I'm happy to be on the other side of that, helping people get ahead of it. But, so often when I was investigating an incident, all of the information about what had happened was in the logs somewhere that the customer had.
Right.
They just didn't see them. And so one of the other things that Orca is really focused on is figuring out what's really important in all of the noise that you're looking at. And so I'll give you an example out of, we released our State of the Cloud report recently, which is we go through all of the data that we have about everything and pull out what's interesting, what common problems we see. And one of my favorite numbers out of there, and I may get this wrong, look at the report to get the exact numbers, but something like 91% of our customers have at least one vulnerability in the cloud running today that's 10 years or older. And 46% have at least one vulnerability that's 20 years or older, the oldest one coming from 2021. Now, when I first looked at that, I sort of laughed, right? Like that's a figure that you go, oh, geez.
I just checked my hearing aid there, Neil, and I was like, wait a minute, did he really say?
Yeah. 40, almost half of everybody has at least one 20-year-old vulnerability in production. But for me, the real story there is not that everybody has a 20-year-old vulnerability in production. It's that vulnerability management is really difficult. There are so many vulnerabilities, and we're seeing this with NIST and NVD right now, right? Like reportedly, the number of vulnerabilities that are in the market today are just crushing the agency that's tasked with tracking them all and making sure we understand what they are. Like that's, and so we see that across everybody I talk to. Like there's just this constant wheel and nobody can solve every vulnerability. So one of the problems we focused on, and this is not just in vulnerabilities, but in vulnerabilities specifically as an example, is if I've got a bunch of machines with a critical vulnerability, if that's all I know, I've got to go patch them all. But from an Orca perspective, we have all this other information. We have information about what's configured in AWS, what's in the workloads, what data do we have, where's that data, what identities do we have, what API, and all of this. So we can say, hey, you've got 10 VMs with this critical vulnerability, but 8 of them are in a pre-prod environment. It's not accessible from the outside world. There's no interesting data. No, patch those, but patch them in your regular cycle. There's 2 of them that are exposed to the outside world, have credit card data on them, and have an elevated identity that has access to other stuff. If something happens to those 2, your day is going to get ruined. And so there's a big focus for us on how do we take all of this information. If you turn on Orca or a similar platform, the first thing you're going to see is there's a lot of stuff you've been doing wrong. There's a lot of stuff you were unaware of. And so it's very important for us to really filter down to what's really critical for organizations to focus on versus what's that tier down that they've got to focus on, but they can be planful about it and get ahead of it. And what are the sort of low and informational things that are interesting, but unless something else comes up, you can kind of let those go.
We in in our personal lives, we have this natural way of prioritizing, food, water, shelter. We prioritize the way we pay our bills first, second, third, get the mortgage payment done first. And then it's kind of shocking sometimes. I'll admit, security team by security team, their culture can be different. Prioritization in some teams we've seen be a real issue where they can kind of subscribe too much to being overwhelmed. And here we need better, this is the better together story, Orca, AWS. We need better ways to surface the most urgent, high priorities and to justify that, why there's going to be a resource or group of resources, people or other kinds of resources, maybe machine resources, spun up and dedicated to fixing this problem right here, because I can clearly communicate to a business leader exactly why that was a priority. And that context and that talk track over to the business leader as to why this investment in people and machine time was needed. That's hugely important because the business leaders that are behind all these security teams, they're struggling to understand what the heck we're talking about, right? And it's rightfully so. It's an industry which is filled with acronyms, filled with deep technical complexities. And that's That's why it's kind of, it's been hard in the past for hiring cybersecurity talent because it's such a deep area.
Oh, it is. It really is. And that continues to be a problem, right? How do we, if we take old approaches to problems, especially if we move them to the cloud, how can we keep up? How can we possibly react, consume everything, respond to every alert? Everybody I talk to faces that challenge and is trying to find ways to address it.
And Neil, you mentioned, a little bit of tidbit there that you started off in incident response. And, these are tools that are very helpful for incident responders and technologies that you mentioned, like, now, especially being cloud native and being able to help like these, side scans versus, agentless scan versus agent scans, but at the same time, bringing in the same level of context and information for that persona where you were previously. Like help us lay out that land of like in your experience, how has that evolved over the years?
Yeah, it's so very traditionally, if I go back to when I first started in that field, which was 2003-ish, everything was focused on forensics, which technically means preparing evidence for use in a court of law. So everything came out of sort of the police and managing. If I got somebody's laptop, how did I prepare that so I could go to court and prosecute them? And it turned out I was working for Microsoft in a remote capacity. We worked with customers to help them investigate. Getting disk images over the internet in 2003 was not a really practical step. So we had to really focus on how can we move to a more fluid internet-based way of interacting with customers and getting data that we can analyze and work with. Now, that's still the old world. As we move into cloud, some significant things change. And I mentioned them earlier, right? Things are ephemeral. So where in 2003, if a laptop got compromised, I could pretty much be assured that laptop still existed when we were investigating it. In 2024, if a container gets compromised, I can't be assured that it's going to still exist when we realize there's a problem and get to it. Right. Or if it's an EC2 instance or sort of whatever it is. And, particularly if it's something like Lambda function as a service, I'm assured whatever was running does not exist by the time I realize there's a problem. So this gives us a number of challenges. Now, I love when people come to me with these problems. So I happened to go through an exercise last week, really focused on something like this with Orca, where somebody found they acquired another company. They found a machine that had indicators of compromise going back years. And one of the things was a backdoor. So the obvious question was, what's the impact? How do we know? And so there was a multi-stage sort of approach to this around, first of all, focusing on, because in this case, the VM still did exist, what was on the VM. And so in Orca, we can go look at what we found. So we found malware on the box. We could go look at that. That gives us one set of tools. We could go look at log files like bash history, auth logs, which told us part of the story as well. And so we started, broadening out what we knew. We could look at the rest of the machine, see if there was anything else on there in terms of running software, packages, modules, services, to see what looked like it might be problematic there. Now, from there, for us, the next phase in sort of triaging an incident, what we call blast radius. So typically in a compromise, the one machine you find or the one thing you find is only the beginning of your journey, because the attacker either got there from somewhere else or they're there to go somewhere else. It's a very lucky attacker that compromises the thing they wanted on the first try.
And that happens to magically be the thing you're looking at right now.
Yeah, that's all the stars align for everybody if that's the case. So the blast radius tells us, where can I get to from this particular asset? So there are some identities here. What can I do with those identities? In this case, there were some SSH keys on the machine. What could I use those SSH keys to get to? What sort of network connectivity do I have? And so that gives investigators an opportunity to go look and say, all right, here are the other things. We know these identities were at risk. These identities can get to these assets. This is where I need to focus my investigation. And we can look back the other way as well, say what can get access to this machine. In this case, it was sitting on the the edge of the network. So we were pretty sure it was patient zero.
Right.
It was the start of it. But if it had been an internal machine, we can go backwards as well, sort of reverse the blast radius to figure out where we need to look. From there, it's diving into things like CloudTrail. Now that we had some clues, right? Like CloudTrail can be an overwhelming amount of data. But now we've got a set of clues to go say, hey, do we see anything sort of suspicious around these identities, these assets, et cetera? And work through that and then go from there. So, I think Orca, when I was a kid, there were commercials about breakfast cereal that talked about it as being a complete part of this breakfast, right? Like no solution is your complete security solution, but AWS is the base that we're running on and providing things like CloudTrail and all of the other pieces. Orca on top of that to give me all of that visibility into things, and then working from there, I think gives you this sort of complete coverage and gives you the ability to effectively investigate the incident, dive into the incident.
And speaking, as we were talking there, Neil, we've got a great kind of audience question here. It's probably good for a philosophical response from all of us here, right? But is securing the cloud more difficult than on-prem, or is it just different? I'll say I think it's easier than on-prem because at least you know where everything is. It's there, right?
Yeah.
And with services like CloudTrail, visibility is not a problem. Visibility can be overwhelming. I think I made that statement in the beginning, but I think it's easier because you at least know where all your assets are, all your resources are. The ephemeral nature of what's running in the cloud can add some twists to the story. But I don't know, Himanshu, Neil, do you guys want to?
Yeah, I think we talk about these paradigms of the positives of cloud security, or how security has become more automated as well as easier. For me, I think I look at it the same way, which is, the verbosity of the information that's available now with SaaS applications or in general cloud applications provides more context, provides more insights into what's happening, where it's happening. The automation and the ease of integration into response actions brings in that, simplicity and the ease of use. And then, if designed correctly, which is why I think we focus on our partners helping, again, secure by design or making sure following, well-architected framework, best practices. Then it also helps make sure that the tools and the solutions that customers are leveraging are also, scalable, provide the right performance parameters, have the right pricing and the cost structures to help customers. So I think that's how I sort of look at it, with on-premise, and especially Neil can relate to this more than anybody else because, he's been in the incident response business for quite some time. With on-premise, you still have a lot of complexity in not having to maintain and manage that inventory of assets, and have visibility into that, which then leads to not so great user experience when it comes to response and remediation.
Yeah, and I feel like I could spend the whole half hour answering this question. So I'll try not to. But the word easier is interesting. I think for a lot of security teams, on-prem is easier to begin with because it's what they're used to. They already have the tools. They have 20, 25 years of thought. It's a well-worn path. When you're moving to the cloud, certainly it is different, and you have to account for that. You have to understand the nature of being ephemeral, the nature of being driven by infrastructure as code largely, and being driven by DevOps and cloud-native approaches. And so those are hard. It does make it more difficult for traditional security teams at first. But we have an opportunity based on all of those things to actually deliver better security with less investment if we embrace all of them, understand them, and build on them. And I give you a couple of examples of that. So in cloud-native DevOps-driven approaches, we've really built everything around a notion of CI/CD, of having automation that takes things that we're writing, builds them, tests them, and deploys them, sometimes with no human hands involved, right? So as a developer, I may write a fix to something, check that fix in, create a pull request, and it's approved, and then it automatically goes through sort of linting to make sure I wrote my code right, and unit testing to make sure I do what I'm supposed to do, integration testing to make sure it plays well with all the other pieces of code, performance testing to make sure it's not slower than it was, and then maybe into a pre-prod environment, and then maybe like, canary testing, red, green, sort of whatever else, to where in some period of time, presuming all those things work, it's deployed to production without me doing anything else. But if any of those things break, I know, oh, I broke my unit test. I've got to go fix that before this ships.
Right.
And when we try to apply traditional security approaches to that, it doesn't work. I saw a number, there's something like 15 developers and DevOps engineers for every cloud security engineer. So we're already outnumbered 15 to 1 on a good day. And it turns out developers and DevOps engineers are really good at using automation to build all of that stuff. So now they've got a force multiplier that we have to embrace as well. And so we call it shift left, which is kind of an unfortunate name for it. But the idea is to take our security policy and automate the application of that in the pipeline as well. So say, hey, you just built something. Does it have critical vulnerabilities in it that are known? Does it have misconfigurations? Does it violate other security policies? And catch those things. In the same way, if I break my unit test, I know I've got to fix that. If I introduce a critical vulnerability in some Python library, I've got to fix that before I ship it. Now, that doesn't mean we won't find a new vulnerability 2 weeks later after it's in production. But it does mean that we move this stuff earlier, we put it in front of developers where it has to be fixed, and we reduce the number of problems we're actually shipping. So now our security teams who are overworked and we say can't get to everything, we're cutting out a ton of alerts right up front, making sure that they can focus on what's emergent, what's higher criticality and severity, what's more interesting, and not spend all of their time focusing on repetitive problems. That's the sort of thinking for me that gets us ahead and puts us in a much better place.
In a parallel universe, I'm also involved in these this Amazon Q thing and this whole Gen AI assistant for developers writing code. And what you're saying, Neil, is giving me like parallels in my other life here at AWS and in my team, and spending less time as a developer on things that are not getting you to your mission of getting that application shipped, like the code checked in, security scans running. Anything that's not that is distracting them from their core mission. And I'm not talking about like,
Ryan. Let's not speed up the developers until we get the security teams up to speed.
That's right. And try to, if there's 15 more developers to security engineers, let's all try to motivate, move those developers to think about adopting some security practices. I'm not saying be an incident responder, but kind of understand some application security techniques, and maybe get a little bit more warm and fuzzy when they get an alert from Orca about something they need to change in their CI/CD pipeline or source code that was identified some kind of vulnerability, like insecure coding practices. That I think I'm starting to see some positive momentum in the industry. I'm not sure if you folks are seeing the same thing.
Very, very much. I think where things are successful, what I'm seeing is, traditionally developers and security were like natural enemies.
Right.
And I think CISOs really in the cloud era are having to break that down and create a collaborative structure where security is not the department of no. We are enabling them to move faster, ship faster, and do it securely. And I talk to CISOs a lot about that problem, and I love. Was down in Atlanta talking to a group recently, and one of them said they've built a security champion program where they get people who are developers and operations and sort of everywhere else who are interested in security. They bring them in, they give them training, they engage their interest, and they become advocates for security, and they make sure that things run more smoothly, problems are found earlier. So
speaking of Gen AI and automation, Neil, is your wallpaper or your background also generated using Gen AI, or is that?
I think that's a little 3D to be wallpaper.
It's a natural collection of a lot of string instruments.
It is. I think you have to work hard and play hard, and so it's sort of. I'm a terrible musician, but I love playing them anyway. So I've collected them over the years, There's other stuff back here. Some of my project stuff sitting over here. There's a Furby sitting there that I will not pick up because it wakes him up. waiting to be gutted, connected to a Raspberry Pi and connected to AI services to answer questions for me sitting on my desk.
Well, ironically, in my team, we had I'm not sure if Himanshu and I mentioned it, but it's planning season at AWS. And I figured I took my team to an offsite and figured out that there's a rhythm guitarist and a bassist actually in my team. So I don't know how that would play with, but we need a percussionist here, Neil. Hopefully you can a little bit.
So in Israel, Orca actually has a full band that plays at events. So we managed to find the full coverage, if you will.
And Neil is not meaning that in a euphemistic way. I think what he's saying is a musical band.
Yes.
There you go.
An actual guitarist. We have percussion, singer, the whole bass player. Yeah.
So any well, maybe no musical plans, but any plans Orca wise for Reinforce in Philadelphia in June? Are you guys coming out?
We are coming out. I believe I will be there. Maybe saying it out loud here will make sure that I'm there. But yes, I've been to a number of Reinforces in the past. Reinforces, I guess that's the plural. Looking forward to the next one.
Awesome. Yeah. I think that's a big event for AWS customers and partners to connect, bring that community of builders together and learn more about security, culture of security, as well as all the products and features that both our partners and AWS has to offer. So we definitely look forward to having you guys there.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a security expert to attend. I mean, I've had people interested in cloud in general, and they show up knowing nothing about security, and they can leave that event at least having like a 100, 200 level understanding, and it's really changed their careers. So for those that are dipping a toe, hey, I think Neil Himanshu would say the same, right? We need more talent in cybersecurity. It's a great opportunity to get like the 101 or the 400. If you are in the industry and you want to go super deep, believe me, there's plenty of sessions and trainings that you can really dive deep into.
And Ryan, that's what I was going to say. Reinforce is one of my favorite shows because of the conversations, because it's my people. I'm a security person, and it's an opportunity to have those conversations with practitioners at all sorts of levels. But to spend all day just like walking through thoughts about cloud security, thoughts about Kubernetes security, thoughts about how we approach particular problems, what's evolving in the market, all of those things I find myself talking about at Reinforce. It's a great time.
Well, Neil from Orca Security, thank you for joining us. We're running out of time, but before we run away, hardest journalistic question for you today, sir. What was for breakfast? I think people want to know.
So I will admit I had a bunch of stuff stacked up this morning, so it was just a cup of coffee and a banana.
All right.
But it was a cup of coffee in my brand new Orca ceramic mug that I just got in the mail.
Ooh. But the box was checked. You have breakfast, so congratulations, sir. And thank you for joining us, Neil. Himanshu and I, folks, we'll see you on the next episode of Security Live every other Wednesday, 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.